Hey everybody, this is Mike Guthrie here. Just taking a look at ways that we can leverage ZD to help secure our deployment processes. And we're just going to take a look at possible common problems that people might have in terms of creating secure access to network resources, ways that modern deployments are done, and some security holes that exist in them, and ways ZD can be used to kind of help secure those and lock those down, make more things dark, and ultimately have a tighter security posture around CI/CD. So what I'm going to do in this first diagram is I'm just going to kind of talk you through at a rough level how a lot of modern deployments are done, particularly using a container orchestration system, whether it's Amazon's ECS or Kubernetes, Rancher. There's a bunch of different container-based deployment solutions. The pattern is generally the same for most of them, but there are places where network access becomes critical, and you still need a way to kind of protect those resources while being able to manage the structure and deployment of those systems. So what we're looking at in this diagram here, well, let's imagine for a moment that over here you've got a VPC that is kind of your CI/CD environment. This is where all of your builds are happening. This is where automated testing is occurring, and so forth. Whatever you're leveraging for CI/CD, you've got those resources inside of this ecosystem. Over here on the box on the right, this is your deployment environment. It's probably a pretty clean environment. It's probably fairly locked down. You'll commonly have an application, and you'll also have additional dependencies. You might have a database, a caching server, a message broker, things like that will also be living inside of this application environment. So let me focus in on this space over here, just for your application environment. Now, a common thing that you'll see, especially like in AWS world, is that you'll have a VPC here, which gives you some level of protection, but within that, you'll leverage this blue square here represents a security group. Security groups are actually a really great way to create security inside of a VPC. If you do them right, you can do a really great job of locking down your resources to where you're really tightly controlled in terms of your point of ingress, but you can also create really nice rule sets that will protect interactions from one resource to another. And so you could even have a security group around, and it basically functions like an invisible firewall. So you could have even another security group around just the application and a security group around the database, and you can create rules that say things like, hey, this security group can talk to this security group, and things like that, unless you get really granular in terms of your protection there. So inside of a VPC, you can create really nice rules to lock down your resources really well within that. Once you get outside of that VPC and you have to open up things like, from one VPC to another, your options become a little bit more limited. There's more rooms for issues to arise there. And we'll kind of cover how ZD can be used to protect that in just a moment. But let's take a look at a deployment process and kind of a gap that'll exist in a lot of people's deployments and how it works. So imagine you've got a deployment where you've got your application is building, it's tested, you create what's called an artifact, to where that is kind of your packaged application that you want to ship and deploy somewhere. A common thing that will be done is that you'll build a container image. You will push that up to some sort of a container image provider, whether it be Docker Hub or Amazon Container Repository, you name it. It's typically some sort of cloud provider that handles storing that container artifact for you. And it's protected by credential access, things like that. It is public API. There's not great opportunity on that space to necessarily secure it with ZD. It's kind of what we're left with. If you're using something native to your cloud provider, a lot of it will be happening kind of in a protected fashion in terms of your pushing and pulling from that repo. But that's how a lot of it is done, for better or worse. So you build your container image, you push it to the container image store or Artifactory, you name it. But you have some place where that container image is kept and protected there. When it comes time to deploy your application, you'll basically go tell your container orchestration system Often it's your cloud provider or your Kubernetes management API. And you'll say, hey, cloud provider, I need you to go deploy and take this application and go get the latest container image, which is the latest version of your application. Go pull it down from the provider, and then change this container to go start running the latest version of that. Now that's all public API stuff, or it might be, you can also set it up privately to happen inside of your cloud provider and so forth. There's not necessarily, there may not be great opportunity there to secure it with ZD, but almost every single application will still leverage network-based resources, and often they will need to be managed. A lot of times they will be managed as part of your CI/CD process. And so where you get this gap in terms of security is that you need your CI/CD server to be able to talk to and potentially create new tables in that database, or make modifications to that table and so forth, that will commonly be done from your CI/CD server. Now, the only way to really secure this from like a security group perspective is you basically have to say, if this is in a different VPC, you have to say, okay, my security group rule, it needs to allow access from this internet gateway that's inside of this VPC. The problem that exists there is that you might have your build servers in there, but that might not be the only thing that's inside of that VPC. You essentially have to open up that subnet to say anything within the subnet now has a security group rule that'll allow it to talk to this database. Now, there's still credentials it needs and things like that, but you are still creating an opening there to where something inside of this VPC, you're exposing the whole subnet basically. Anything inside of this VPC could potentially reach across and try to hit this database from there. So, and this is happening with a common thing that you'll see, and we have this in our own pipelines, is that you'll have you'll be building your code and so forth, and you'll have we have something called Flyway. It's basically a way to manage database changes from our build server, and it is reaching across and doing a network level interaction with databases in our various environments, and then from there it proceeds to deploying code and so forth. And the way that you can begin to secure this with ZD is that what that would look like is that instead of doing this red line here, which we don't like, the green lines are fine. We're not as concerned about those because those are punch outs. But this red line here is not so good because we basically got a door that can be compromised. And so we're gonna take this red line out, and let me just say we're gonna take it out. And then instead, what we're going to do is we're going to put an edge router inside of, we'll actually even put it inside of that security group so we can talk to what it needs to talk to. And we'll put a Net Foundry cloud, which is basically Net Foundry Fabric out here. And then what we'll do is that we can put actually ZD on our build servers itself. And basically create secure tunneling so that you no longer have to worry about, you'll still have an internet gateway, but you'll no longer have a doorway going into that private security group space. So instead, now these are now talking out to ZD to do the interaction, and then you've got the edge router over here talking to the Net Foundry cloud, which is great. These are all happy green lines. This is the kind of connectivity that we want because we're not creating a door into our system. Now, if we want to get fancy with this, which of course we do because this is the new world, and isn't it cool that we can tighten this down even more and make it even harder for somebody to interact with, is that these, let's say we're just using a tunneler, for example, and we're not even doing any kind of application embedded setup, we're just using a tunneler. If we wanted to really make this lockdown, is that we could actually, I would build this into my pipeline to where basically the tunneler is not even running on these boxes by default, and the tunneler is off. I could actually build this into my database migration step to where when this step runs, it turns the tunneler on and the intercept kicks in, so that only during this individual build step is the connectivity even available to talk to the databases. And once this step is done, tunneler shuts back down, and there's no more doorway in any capacity to talk to that box. that's the piece that's really powerful with programmable networking, is that you can basically control the access in terms of even from a time base to where there's only a limited window of time to where we even create the connectivity to be able to reach across into this private space over here. So lots of opportunities in terms of really locking this down and limiting the access and so forth. But what it's done is that if we put ZD on here, this machine over here, which is something else, this might be a less secured resource and so forth, no longer has any way to get across over here. And again, if you leverage kind of the time-based tunneling to where the tunneler is not running by default, if the tunneler is not running, there's literally no way to reach across over here and gain access. And even when it is running, it's still trust-based and so forth. And potentially you could even put your tunneler config in some sort of a secret store and things like that. So that way, the application itself has to have permissions to even run the tunneler with the config and so forth. So there's lots of ways that you can really, really lock it down if you need to tighten up security around your automation processes. But that's just a rough idea of ways that you can secure your network resources using ZD during a CI/CD deployment process.